countywide 14 years ago, and we have loved living in Page County and in Southwest Iowa. One of the best parts politically about living in Iowa is the chance to be the first in the nation to caucus, which means that all eyes are on Iowa. And we have a chance to set the tone and to make our voice heard across the nation. And of all the candidates who are visiting Southwest Iowa, I am least surprised that Beto O'Rourke is here. When he was running in Texas last year for the Senate, he visited all 254 counties of Texas multiple times. He wanted to make sure that every Texan had their chance to see him, to hear him, and to hear his vision. And last October, I was in San Antonio visiting my family. And I was able to take my nephew, who was 13 years old, and his mom, my sister-in-law, to a Beto O'Rourke rally. And in a standing room only, filled with hundreds of people, we got to watch this man inspire Texas. And inspire him he did, because in Houston alone, they were able to seat 17 African-American female judges, literally changing the face of the judicial system in Texas. He was also able to rally the youth. Texas is ranked 50th as far as voter participation, and they had a 500% increase in the youth vote because of him. He was so inspired by the rally that he grabbed up as many signs as he could, the yard signs, and he grabbed up as many stickers and like we have on, but these were all for his Senate run. And he went door to door that night to our neighborhood, and he convinced every neighbor along the road, along the street they lived on, to put a Beto sign in their yard. And so when you would drive down the street, it looked like a mini Beto convention. He also went to school that day. He's an 8th grader, he's in middle school, and he convinced his friends, even Republicans, to put Beto stickers on their folders. He wore the Beto sticker on his clothing. He was very proud, and he continues to talk about that experience, and he will continue to talk about it for the rest of his life. They are so excited that I have the opportunity to be here today and to introduce Beto. Let me tell you a little bit more about him. He has solid experience at the city level, the county level, the state level, and the national level. He represented Texas for the House of Representatives, and in doing so, one of his big issues was bringing mental health services to veterans and expanding that across the nation. Here in Page County, we know that the mental health crisis is critical. When the governor decided to close the Clarendon Mental Health Institute, one of only 3 state mental health facilities, it was a blow to Page County because of the loss of jobs, but also the loss of resources. I work in EMS, and I know that when we have a patient that is in need of mental health services, that patient, sometimes it takes us 6 hours to find an open bed somewhere in the state. And we often have to drive 2 to 4 hours to drive that patient to that bed. We've gone to Dubuque, we've gone to Iowa City just for that placement. A placement that we wouldn't have to necessarily make if we had more mental health facilities locally and nearby. And so I'm excited that mental health is one of his issues that he'll bring. Another thing is bringing the importance of clean water and public lands and making sure that for future generations we have an earth that we can live on, and that we have the knowledge that our water is safe to drink, and that we have places we can go, our children can go, our grandchildren can go. When Beto announced his campaign for the President of the United States, he said, "This moment is our test. The generation that follows ours, the people of the future, are counting on us, and we cannot be found wanting." It is my honor to introduce to you today Beto O'Rourke. He is the rising star at the Democratic Party. And in the CNN poll last week, they polled that he is the presidential hopeful most likely to defeat Donald Trump. So, ladies and gentlemen,
good morning. Buenos dias. Good to see everybody. Thank you. Thanks for having us out here today. Great to be at the Cottonwood Pavilion. This is a really extraordinary space. We've not had a town hall in a setup quite like this before, so I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for being here and helping to make it a success. Karen, thank you for the introduction, for everything that you just said about why we're all in this together and why it's so important not just to defeat Donald Trump in November of 2020, though it is, but it's also important to bring this very divided country together, to make sure that we see ourselves as Americans first with a common challenge and opportunity to answer this moment of truth. And whether it's climate, the economy, healthcare, public school education, delivering for veterans who have put their lives on the line for this country, I want to make sure that we can all come together to do that. And that's why I'm here in Shenandoah this morning. I'm so grateful to have you introduce me. Thank you. And I would love here formally, publicly, to offer your nephew the job of middle school outreach going forward. So all those folders covered in Beto stickers going forward. Chairwoman Adcock, thank you for organizing us and for organizing Southwest Iowa, so that everyone's voice is lifted, everybody's vote counts. We're organized and we're ready for this challenge that we have right now. So thank you for what you're doing. And let me just, for a moment, if you'll indulge me, just tell you from an outsider's perspective how beautiful this community is. I got in at the end of the day yesterday, and sun was setting, and we kind of took in a little bit of downtown. Beautiful street. I think we were on Sheridan Street, checking into our hotel. Got up early this morning and went for a run, and it was just staggeringly beautiful. Perhaps the most beautiful day that I've been alive on this planet. This spring day in Shenandoah, Iowa. Sun was out, perfect temperature for a run. Ran by the Veterans Civil War Memorial, right across from the Company E Memorial, the old armory, which I understand you all opened up to shelter your fellow Iowans who were flooded out of house and home, providing shelter for them. Your kindness on display, read the articles about that, and got to see the armory for myself. Ran down Grant Street, made my way to the cemetery, the Rose Hill Cemetery, up on that hill, looking over these cornfields that I guess are about to be planted, looking back over the city. Just beautiful. And I brought my phone with me, just took pictures along the way to send back to my wife, which I did. And she confirms, from the photos, beautiful. Walked over to the depot to have breakfast this morning. And do you have a connection to the depot? Okay. Well, wonderful eggs over medium and bacon, rye toast with some jelly. And as we're walking in, I didn't know this, and it wasn't in the Wikipedia entry for some reason, but we passed the Everly Brothers childhood home. And then Mark and I are sitting at a booth, and there's a picture of the Everly Brothers sitting at a booth similar, maybe the same one that we were in, many decades ago. Yeah. And just, that was powerful to me. And then as I was on Sheridan Street in Shenandoah, though Wikipedia says that you are named after the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia because it looks similarly beautiful, I couldn't escape the history of the association, and that General Sheridan defeated General Early in the Shenandoah Valley and then played a pivotal role in ensuring that we got General Lee's surrender at Appomattox. And so all of this history, all of these connections, all these associations, including the earliest days of rock and roll with the Everly Brothers, all coming home right here in Shenandoah. So thank you for having us out here. If I do nothing else today, I will have won by getting to be in your community. Beautiful place. So thank you for having us out. I will keep my remarks short and sweet, and then we will make the best use of this time and allow me to listen to and learn from you. But as Karen said, I firmly believe that we are in the test of our lifetimes. If you look at any challenge before us, the ability to see a doctor or afford medication or take your child to a therapist is out of reach for tens of millions of our fellow Americans. And it means that in so many cases, they're leading diminished lives. They're not rising to their full potential, giving all of us everything that they have inside of them, revealing their genius, in some tragic cases leading lives that are much shorter than they would be otherwise, and doing it at extraordinary expense to all of us. If you end up getting your mental health care in the county jail, which unfortunately so many people do, who have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, don't have insurance, and have found that our county jails in some states are the largest provider of mental health care services. Not only is that bad for you, it's bad for us, and not just because of the immorality of that. It costs us in Houston, Texas, $110 a night to keep somebody locked up who got arrested to be prescribed psychotropic medication to make their life at least temporarily bearable. For a fraction of the cost, we can provide consistent outpatient mental health care services. That person's going to be better off. They're going to be able to contribute far more in the job that they work, the taxes that they pay, that burden that they can shoulder so that it rests a little bit lighter on the rest of us. Whatever they're supposed to do in their time on this planet, they're going to be well enough to do it if we invest in primary care, access to affordable prescription medications, and for women in this country, in the midst of a maternal mortality crisis, 3 times as deadly for women of color, ensuring that every single one of them can make their own decisions about their own body and have access to the care that allows them to do that is a life or death matter in the United States of America. So we should be up to that challenge. And I think we are. Universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care for everyone. It's an investment, it's an expense, but it is a heck of a lot cheaper than the way that we pay or fail to pay for care in this country today. In Texas, as I'm learning in Iowa, we are defined by the immigrant story. I'm sure there are many examples of that here in Shenandoah. I was surprised, and I should not have been, when I was in Storm Lake, to meet so many immigrants who had followed jobs in agriculture, in meat packing, who are now investing in the long-term viability and growth and success of that community, opening up restaurants and bars and bakeries, and making sure that quality of life improved, and that there was a reason for the next generation to stay or come back to Storm Lake, Iowa. That's much the same story in my hometown of El Paso, Texas, one half of the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere, a community defined by immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees who have helped to make us one of the safest cities in the United States, almost bar none, not despite their presence, I would argue, because of their presence. And so an opportunity right there. Yeah, let's hear it. Let's hear it for El Paso. An opportunity right there to make the most of their presence. If we think about 1 million immigrants brought here at a very young age, we call them dreamers, contributing in every way possible to the success of this country, who live under a constant fear of being deported back to a country they do not know, whose language they do not speak. We could meet that challenge by freeing them forever from that fear, by making them U.S. citizens here in their true home country. That's an opportunity for us as well. On the economy, you know this, I know this, we have people in our lives, you may be the people in our lives, who are working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. $7.25 an hour, the minimum wage in many states today. Not enough if you're working full-time to put food on the table, pay the note on the mortgage, be able to put something aside for your kids or the next generation. You've got to work 2, sometimes 3 jobs to be able to do that. And what struck me, the perversity of the lack of economic opportunity in this country right now, is so often I'm meeting school teachers and public school educators who are the ones working those 2 or 3 jobs, even though we would argue they have the most important job in front of them. That child whose lifelong love of learning, once unlocked, there's no stopping that kid, and there's no stopping us as a country. So making sure that we meet that challenge with a living minimum wage, making sure that we have paid family leave so you can take time off to take care of your folks or your kids or yourself without losing income or losing your job, making sure that there's no discrimination in the workplace. In Texas, it is perfectly legal to fire you if you are gay. It is perfectly legal to deny you a job based on your sexual orientation. And in the United States of America, this figure is astounding to me. Women are paid 80 cents on the dollar for what men make. African American women, 61 cents on the dollar for what men make. Latinas in this country, 53 cents on the dollar for what men make. So ending discrimination and having the states finally ratify the Equal Rights Amendment so all women in this country are treated the same as all men in this country, that's a great opportunity for us. And the last one that I'll leave you with before I listen to you is climate. And the fact that beyond the shadow of a doubt, clear consensus among the scientists, among those who studied this planet and our weather patterns, and frankly, you all know this better than almost anybody. The Missouri River Basin saw 4 times the runoff of a normal year. In fact, the greatest runoff since we've been keeping records of the Missouri River. It's not unlike what we're seeing in Davenport right now, where we have flood levels that broke the record set in 1993. I believe the highest flood levels of the Mississippi at that point for as long as we've been keeping records there. Houston, Texas, in my home state, 58 inches of rain fell from the sky in just one storm, which is the landfall record for North America for as long as we've been keeping records. Droughts in the Panhandle and West Texas, fires in California, floods here and in Nebraska and Missouri and Kansas. We know that the 1 degree Celsius that this planet has warmed just since 1980 over pre-industrial revolution levels has helped to cause what we are experiencing right now. And it is not an act of God, nor of Mother Nature. This is on us. Our emissions, our excesses, our inaction in the face of that science, those facts, and that truth has produced what we are seeing right now. And we are on course to have something far worse for those generations that will succeed us. I was just in Pacific Junction yesterday. And that town, as you know, was completely flooded out. Every single home, the water was over the roof levels. We went to a farm not too far from Pacific Junction. There is a lake in those fields. Standing water still 5 weeks after those floods. We wonder whether Pacific Junction will be able to rebuild. I think it will. I got to meet the mayor, Mayor Young there. His tenacity, the courage of those residents who are mucking out their houses. I know that they will be up to that challenge. But it calls into question whether human beings will be able to live in the places that we take for granted right now. Those refugees that are fleeing to our southern border right now from the Northern Triangle, so many of them are trying to plant food that is not growing in the ground during historic droughts in the Northern Triangle of Central America right now. 400,000 apprehensions last year will be a drop in the bucket compared to what we will see when some of those countries will no longer sustain human life. So what do we do in the face of that challenge? Well, we know that we can free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels. Iowa has taken the lead on that historically over the last 40 years. And we need to build on that lead. We know, because you have taught me, and this is something that I've learned in Iowa, farmers want to be able to do more. And if we encourage them to and allow them to make a profit, which is all that I've heard any farmer want to be able to do in the Farm Bill by planting cover crops to pull more of that carbon out of the air, opening up technologies like precision tilling to disturb less of the carbon that is in the soil. If all of us in every single part of this country, not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans, do everything that we can meet this challenge with our leadership, with our courage, with our imagination, and we can take our rightful role on the world stage as the indispensable nation, convening the other powers of the planet to do their part as well. And then maybe, just maybe, we will have averted the worst disaster and catastrophe that you and I will not have to endure, but our kids and our grandkids will. This is our moment as a country. And I want to make sure that we see it that way, that we write nobody off, that we take no one for granted. I could care less who you voted for in 2016, to whom you pray, or if you pray at all, who you love, how many generations you can count yourself an American, or whether you just showed up this morning. The thing is that we have the chance of our lifetimes, the chance of the lifetime of this country to do the right thing, and I want us to be able to do it together. And that's why I'm running to serve you as President of the United States of America. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming. Thank you. So Cynthia Cano up here has got a microphone. If you have a question or a comment or some guidance from me, would love to hear directly from you.
Can I ask you a question without a mic?
Yes, you can. Here, I'm gonna hand you this, and we'll switch mics.
All right. Obviously, we have a very dishonest president, and what are you going to do to beat him? And I have a follow-up, being what press people do.
Yeah, you got it. I'm happy to, and he's got a follow-up, Ms. Conner. So no one person is going to be able to defeat Donald Trump. It's going to take all of us to do this. Karen was sketching out a little bit of what we were able to be a part of, and I was only a part of it in Texas, visiting those 254 counties. Not only did young voter turnout go up 500%, not only are we no longer 50th in voter turnout, we expanded the number of Democrats who participated in that election. We won independence in Texas for the first time in a decade, and 500,000 Republicans who voted for Greg Abbott, our Republican Tea Party, conservative, Donald Trump-loving governor, also voted for me on the same ballot without having to trim my sails or show up with. We had an amazing movement with us, behind us, that I got to be a part of, comprised of everyday Texans, just like the people here, just like me, who were willing to knock on doors, make phone calls, bring people in. We never divided one another. We never defined each other by our differences. We never shut somebody out. I went to a county that is not the reddest county in the state of Texas. It is the reddest county in the United States of America. It voted for Donald Trump 96%. King County, the county seat is Guthrie. We showed up there because everyone in Guthrie is every bit as deserving of being shown respect, of being listened to, of being learned from, of being served, of being fought for. And those folks in Guthrie, they know that now. And I picked up all of 2 or 3 votes to prove that in Guthrie. So that's the way that we're going to campaign, but we're going to need your help to be able to do that.
Thank you. The follow-up is this: foreign policy. I mean, no disrespect to you. I don't know what foreign policy experience you have, but what would you do?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's probably a pretty layup question for you.
It's a great question. And this is another one of these extraordinary opportunities that we can pose as a challenge for us. So if we look at where the United States is in relation to the rest of the world right now, we've just had a foreign power attack our democracy. Again, beyond the shadow of a doubt, except in the mind of just one person, who happens to be the leader of our country, charged with defending us against future attacks in the 2020 elections and beyond. Somebody who, after the Mueller report was released, called Vladimir Putin and spent an hour on the phone, not warning him not to attack this country, but dismissing the entire investigation as a hoax. So job number 1 is defending the United States against these kind of attacks going forward, or any kind of attack on our country. Job number two, as this president has fallen in love, as he describes it, with Kim Jong-un, a brutal dictator in North Korea, as he has defended Vladimir Putin on that stage in Helsinki, Finland, instead of the United States of America and our intelligence community, as he has built friendships with people like the brutal rulers in Saudi Arabia, MBS, who kills journalists with impunity, Al-Sisi in Egypt, Duterte in the Philippines, Erdogan in Turkey. He's also turned his back on our historic allies and partners and friends around the world. Friendships and alliances forged in sacrifice. If we go back 80 years to World War II, out of that you get the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. 29 countries, the only time Article 5, invoking the common defense, one of their members was used, was in 2001, when we were attacked on 9/11. And yet our president questions the viability of that organization, which invites more adventurism from Russia. So we've got to get back to our true friendships and alliances. We have to reassert our claim to leading the world's democracies at a moment that democracy is in question, and I would argue it's in question here in this country as well. And then we have a unique opportunity and ability and historically power to convene the other countries on this planet together to resolve otherwise intractable differences or problems. Climate change, first and foremost among them, nuclear disarmament, and then finding a way to end these wars that we're in all over the world. We're in our 28th year through 6 successive presidential administrations in Iraq with no end in sight and no definition of victory. Our 18th year in Afghanistan. No definition of victory, no end in sight. But we're also in Somalia, in Libya, in Yemen, in Syria tonight. And those are just 6 of the countries where we are at war. We need the rest of the world. We need to be able to work with them to end them. And then lastly, how in the world do tens of thousands of kids show up on our front door at the Texas-Mexico border and that become a surprise to us? We have neglected those people and countries to whom we are connected by land, by culture, increasingly by family and heritage. And so instead of cutting off all foreign aid to the Northern Triangle countries, as President Trump wants to do, I see this as a chance to invest in violence reduction and prevention so families do not have to flee 2,000 miles and show up at the Texas-Mexico border, reprioritizing the Western Hemisphere, which is to our own advantage, is another great foreign policy opportunity for us. Thank you for the question. Sorry for the long answer, but it was a good one.
Hi, my name is Christine McDonough, and I'm very happy to hear you speaking to healthcare and mental health. They're take this medication on a daily basis and submit myself to drug testing in order to assure that I was not selling my medication. Now, this is medication I took on a very rare basis, maybe a couple times a year when I could not get up and walk. So I worry about the unintended consequences that we're seeing in response to the opioid crisis. I think we definitely need to respond to it. I know it's a huge problem. I think mental health, as you mentioned, is a huge piece of that, and I was glad to hear you speak to mental health because I think they're intertwined. But I was wondering if you would support something like the harm reduction that's being put forward in the CARE Act. I know that you're not in that position right now to vote, but I just wanted to know, do you support that kind of legislation so that we can put some of the control over how these crises are being handled into a more local level, so that local, like Iowa, can deal with Iowa's issues and with the people they have there, and we can get a little bit more local control for those kind of issues.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking my question.
Thank you. Yeah, I like the idea, and I like the way that you offer a solution based on local conditions, local expertise, and local solutions. I'll give you some examples that can add to this discussion. We were in New Hampshire, and they have a program called Safe Stations, where you can walk in some communities, into any fire station, no questions asked, no involvement with the criminal justice system. If you are at risk of overdosing on opioids, program where for every person who is prescribed an opioid, they are simultaneously prescribed the opioid overdose medication so that you don't have to walk into a pharmacy down the road after you filled that first prescription or call a doctor or worry about judgment or consequences. You just have it on in your home in case you need it going forward. And that's a local response to it as well. So yes, we've got to get a handle on this. After 70,000 of our fellow Americans died of drug overdoses in just the last year, many of them from opioids, we know that many people who are buying heroin and opioids on the streets began with a lawfully prescribed prescription, and without the right controls or help and guidance, they're at risk of hurting themselves or losing their lives. We've got to make sure that there's accountability for those who marketed opioids without telling the prescribers about the consequences and the side effects and the risk of addiction. And then we've got to make sure that we are arming, if that's the right word, our doctors and our prescribers and our medical community, including our mental health care community, with alternatives to opioids where those will work. And I'll just give you one example. One of those young men who's buying heroin on the street, who began with a lawfully prescribed opioid, was a veteran who came to a town hall just like this in El Paso and told me that the VA, in a ham-handed response to this crisis, cut off his prescription, but gave him nothing as an alternative and kind of forced him into that situation. He's not a criminal justice challenge, he's a public health opportunity. Doctors at the VA have told me they would like, in some instances, to be able to prescribe medicinal cannabis because that does more to alleviate the pain or the symptoms. It's not addictive, you cannot overdose from it, but right now it's Schedule I and they are not allowed to provide the care that they need to. It's far better for their patients. So taking a more holistic approach, but also listening to local stakeholders, as you just suggest, I think that can be the way that we come up with an answer to this crisis.
I think the situation that I was in would actually make people become addicted, you know, because I'm talking about using the
Hi, my name is Becca Lyman, and just one question is, I've heard you touch on all the hot topics, which thank you, and thanks for coming. One that I don't know if I heard is the crisis that I see in my generation and the generations below us, student loans. So I'd like to know your thoughts there.
You're absolutely right to describe it as a crisis. $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt. The average graduate today, $40,000 on their back. Many have tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars more. We're seeing about a 10% default rate, which shows us that people cannot afford to maintain this. It's a drag on them and their families and their productivity, and by extension, it's a drag on our economy and this country. And it's just not right to ask somebody to take on debt to teach our kids in school or to provide care for a veteran at the VA, and to have to pay continuously for years afterwards for the privilege of making this a better country. So what is the solution to this? Yesterday, I was fortunate enough to give the commencement address at Paul Quinn College. Founded in 1872, it's the oldest historically black college west of the Mississippi. They just innovated something called an urban work program. Every single one of those students is connected to a job that helps to defray the total cost by around $10,000 a year of their tuition. They've been able to cut in half the amount of student loan debt that they are carrying going forward. I see a great opportunity to invest in more HBCUs and urban work programs like that. I think that there's an investment we need to make in community colleges universally for every single American. They should be free. An associate's degree at least allows you to earn more, do more, move to a higher level of purpose and potential and promise. And then four-year universities that are publicly funded, public-facing, and serve the public should not add debt to members of the public who want to attend them. All of this will cost some money for sure, but I think we can look at it as an investment that improves the productivity of our fellow Americans, that pays a return far and above the initial cost. And lastly, if you are carrying some of that debt right now, here's how I want to meet that challenge. If you're willing to dedicate some significant part of your life to public service, teaching in an underserved community, in an in-demand profession, providing one of those 45,000 clinical positions in the VA that is funded but left open right now because we cannot find the talent to do that. I want to wipe clean and clear your debt so you can focus on serving your fellow Americans. And at a minimum, I want to refinance the debt that you have at a much lower rate. Thank you. You want to ask a follow-up? Go ahead.
So sorry, just to follow up there. So education-wise, it's wonderful, and definitely for the healthcare industry, it's wonderful. But the majority of industry right now is more cloud, AI, tech-based, right? And unfortunately, you didn't know this, but I work in the tech industry, and so the solution that you're proposing is going to serve about 15 to 20% of those jobs, but not the other majority of the jobs that women like myself were being pushed into and trying to strive to are more IT-based and engineering-based.
Yeah.
So the refinancing piece, if you could just expand on that, or maybe I can get some collateral, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, happy to do that. And just in short and in summary, if you don't have the opportunity to enter a public service career, I do want to make sure that you can refinance at much lower rates than you are paying right now. And we'd be happy to follow up with information about how to do that. Again, all this is going to require an investment, but that's an investment in you, in your future, and your ability very often to be able to afford to live in a town like Shenandoah or a town like El Paso, where I have young people who are telling me they'd love to move back home but cannot afford to do that, paying back their student loans. So there's a real benefit to you being able to be here right now. So thanks, appreciate that.
Hi, my name's Cindy. We just got back from our 12th winter in the Texas Valley.
Where were you?
McAllen and Brigade.
Okay, right.
And my heart would break at night with those poor babies separated from their parents down there. We see different things on the news down there than the people up here get to see.
Yeah.
My question is, what are your thoughts on border security and what can we do to alleviate that problem?
This is one of these great opportunities that we have as a country to get it right, and to avoid the judgment and condemnation of our kids and our grandkids. You all may or may not know this story about the St. Louis set sail from Hamburg to Havana in 1939 with more than 900 Jewish refugees aboard. Cuba changed its immigration and asylum laws as they were crossing the Atlantic. They were not able to land, so they tried to come to the United States of America. They tried to run aground in Florida. And in the FDR administration, we sent out Coast Guard cutters to prevent them from being able to do that, forcing that ship to go back to Germany, where more than 200 of her passengers, children, women, and men, were killed during the Holocaust. Now that stains our conscience and our history forever. When 2 weeks ago, not too far from where you winter, a 3-year-old boy showed up in a cornfield outside of Brownsville, Texas, 3 years old, alone, with a phone number written in permanent marker on his shoe so that they could contact somebody here in the United States. That's on all of us to get right. And you know, and I know, that our response so far has been to put that kid in a cage. If he was lucky enough to show up with a parent, to deport that mother or father back to the country from which they fled in the first place, making a 2,000-mile journey on foot, sometimes if they're lucky not inside of a train, but on the roof called the Beast or La Bestia. And right now there are kids all over the country, literally God only knows where, whose parents are back in the northern triangle of Central America, who have no hope or prospect of ever being reunited again. To me, that is torture, and that is cruelty. And it is not one man, though it was his decision, Donald Trump. It is on all of us in a democracy where the people are the government to get this right. And so you're speaking out about this. Those who joined us in Tornillo, Texas, where a tent camp was constructed to house these kids without their parents, who protested and demanded that President Trump's administration stop the practice of family separation, which they temporarily did, almost, although there's some of that still going on, finally brought that tent camp down. That level of engagement and participation and protest and advocacy is so desperately needed right now. So yes, in an O'Rourke administration first day in 2021, we will stop any practice of family separation, reunite all of those who have been separated, honor our asylum laws, and rewrite our immigration laws at large with Republicans, Democrats, independents at the table to reflect our values, our morals, our traditions, who we are as a country of immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. But for that 3-year-old boy, and for others who are showing up right now because they have no other choice but to come here, we've got to act now. We cannot wait for that next election. So thank you for being an advocate and for sharing that story with others. We all have to talk to our members of Congress, to our senators, to our government, and make sure that that government reflects our values and our interests. Thank you for saying that. Appreciate it.
This is our last question. Yes, I'm wondering what we can do locally to be leaders in sustainability. What do you need us to do locally?
Yeah. So this challenge of climate brought home by the flooding of the Missouri River on this side of the state, the Mississippi right now on the other side of the state. Every other example that I gave earlier, much in the same way this question was asked about asylum seekers and our response to that, it is on all of us. There's no one person or agency or organization who's going to fix this one. There is no silver bullet. Every single one of us has the opportunity in our habits of consumption, in our ability to read the news and the facts, and to make sure that that's reflected in the policies, practices, and laws that are made by those who represent us. And meeting this opportunity with the urgency that it demands, the scientists are pretty clear about this. There are just 10 years left to us to get this right. Afterwards, these little kiddos in the room right now and the kids that they have are going to have a much harder time surviving in this community or really almost anywhere on this planet. And so converting from fossil fuels to renewable energy, that's something that we can mandate at the government level, but it's also something that we can practice in our own lives. I don't know if this is worth anything, but Amy back home in El Paso just helped us convert fully to solar at our home. We're kind of changing some of our consumption practices. El Paso has become a leader in water conservation, so watering our lawns a little bit less, using less water in our homes, in our lives, in our businesses, so that we can sustain the desert Southwest for the generations that follow us. But the plan that we announced this last Monday involves all of us because it will require an investment of $5 trillion over the next 10 years. It will require us to no longer allow oil and gas leases on federal public lands and waterways. It will require us, this federal government that makes billions of dollars in purchases every year will have to take into account the carbon cost and pollution cost of what we purchase. So it will change what we buy, how we operate, how we move. And then this extraordinary system of capitalism, our economy, made more conscientious, harnessed towards this common goal of saving the planet, the ingenuity, the innovation that we will see coming out of that, much as we have seen out of Iowa over the last 45 years, as we've taken about 10% of oil off the market or out of our cars when we replace it with plant-based ethanol. That's what we're looking for going forward. So that is all of us. Sometimes we talk about an all-of-government approach. This is an all-of-America approach, including you and me. So thank you for asking the question on that. Appreciate that. Cynthia is saying that that's our last question. Let me just close with this real briefly. First and foremost, my thanks for your time early on a Sunday morning to welcome me, to ask questions, to allow me to introduce myself. And then I've got to tell you this, before I traveled to Iowa this visit, I called your member of Congress, Cindy Axne, and I asked her what I should know about the communities I would be visiting. She spoke with fierce pride about Shenandoah, about Pacific Junction, about the communities, Council Bluffs, where we had a town hall yesterday evening, and even more promising, she talked about her efforts to get disaster funding to these communities, a $3 billion bill that will get aid to farmers, to towns, to those homeowners who lost everything in their lives. And most importantly for some, given the fact that the farmers in Iowa feed and sustain not just this country, but so much of the rest of the world, all of that stored grain and soybeans. We were on the Sargent farm yesterday and we saw one of these soybean silos that had just literally burst. As the soybeans soaked up all the water, grew in size, they just burst the sides of the container that they were in. She's going to ensure that stored grain is covered in that disaster response. So you already know this, but I just want to give you an outsider's perspective. She's an extraordinary member of Congress. We are very lucky to have her representing us. Thank you all for having us out here today, and we hope to see you back again soon. Karen, thank you.
Really appreciate it. There you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you.